Welcome to Chapter 5 of The Silkworm by Robert Galbraith. There's nothing of so infinite vexation as man's own thoughts. John Webster, The White Devil. 9:20 that evening found Strike lying in a t-shirt and boxers on top of his duvet, with the remnants of a takeaway curry on the chair beside him, reading the sports pages while the news played on the TV he had set up facing the bed. The metal rod that served his right ankle gleamed silver in the light from the cheap desk lamp he had placed on a box beside him. There was to be an England-France friendly at Wembley on Wednesday night, but Strike was more interested in Arsenal home derby against Spurs the following Saturday. He had been an Arsenal fan since his earliest youth, in imitation of his Uncle Ted. Why Uncle Ted supported the Gunners when he had lived all his life in Cornwall was a question Strike had never asked. A misty radiance, through which stars were struggling to twinkle, filled the night sky beyond the tiny window beside him. A few hours' sleep in the middle of the day had done virtually nothing to alleviate his exhaustion, but he did not feel quite ready to turn in yet, not after a large lamb biryani and a pint of beer. A note in Robin's handwriting lay beside him on the bed. She had given it to him as he had left the office that evening. 2 appointments were noted there. The first read, Christian Fisher, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Crossfire Publishing, Exmouth Market, ECI. Why does he want to see me? Strike had asked her, surprised. I only need the address of that retreat he told Quinn about. I know, said Robin. That's what I told him, but he sounded really excited to meet you. He said he could do 9 tomorrow and wouldn't take no for an answer. What? Strike asked himself irritably, staring at the note. What was I playing at? Exhausted, he had allowed temper to get the better of him that morning and ditched a well-heeled client who might well have put more work his way. Then he had followed Leonora Quinn to steamroller him into accepting her as a client on the most dubious promise of payment. Now that she was not in front of him, it was hard to remember the mixture of pity and curiosity that had made him take her case on. In the stark, cold quiet of his attic room, his agreement to find her sulking husband seemed quixotic and irresponsible. Wasn't the whole point of trying to pay off his debts that he could regain a sliver of free time, a Saturday afternoon at the Emirates, a Sunday lion? He was finally making money after working almost non-stop for months, attracting clients not only because of that first glaring bout of notoriety, but because of a quieter word of mouth. Couldn't he have put up with William Baker for another 3 weeks? And what, Strike asked himself, looking down at Robin's handwritten note again, was this Christian Fisher so excited about that he wanted to meet in person? Could it be Strike himself, either as the solver of the Lula Landry case or, much worse, as the son of Johnny Rokeby? It was very difficult to gauge the level of your own celebrity. Strike had assumed that his burst of unexpected fame was on the wane. It had been intense while it lasted, but the telephone calls from journalists had subsided months ago, and it was almost as long since he had given his name in any neutral context and heard Lula Landry's back. Strangers were once again doing what they had done most of his life, calling him some variation on Cameron Strick. On the other hand, perhaps the publisher knew something about the vanished Owen Quinn that he was eager to impart to Strike. Although why, in this case, he had refused to tell Quinn's wife, Strike could not imagine. The second appointment that Robin had written out for him was beneath Fisher's. Thursday, November 18th, 6:30 p.m., The King's Arms, 25 Rupel Street, SEI. Strike knew why she had written the date out so clearly. She was determined that this time, was it the 3rd or 4th time they'd tried? He and her fiancé would finally meet. Little though the unknown accountant might believe it, Strike was grateful for Matthew's mere existence and for the sapphire and diamond ring that shone from Robin's third finger. Matthew sounded like a dickhead. Robin little imagined how accurately Strike remembered each of her casual asides about her fiancé. But he imposed a useful barrier between Strike and a girl who might otherwise disturb his equilibrium. Strike had not been able to guard against warm feelings for Robin, who had stuck by him when he was at his lowest ebb and helped him turn his fortunes around, nor having normal eyesight. Could he escape the fact that she was a very good-looking woman? He viewed her engagement as the means by which a thin, persistent draft is blocked up, something that might, if allowed to flow untrammeled, start to seriously disturb his comfort. Strike considered himself to be in recovery after a long, turbulent relationship that had ended, as indeed it had begun, in lies. He had no wish to alter his single status, which he found comfortable and convenient, and had successfully avoided any further emotional entanglements for months, in spite of his sister Lucy's attempts to fix him up with women who sounded like the desperate dregs of some dating site. Of course, it was possible that once Matthew and Robin were actually married, Matthew might use his improved status to persuade his new wife to leave the job that he clearly disliked her doing. Strike had correctly interpreted Robin's hesitations and evasions on that score. However, Strike was sure that Robin would have told him, had the wedding date been fixed, so he considered that danger, at present, remote. With yet another huge yawn, he folded the newspaper and threw it onto the chair, turning his attention to the television news. His one personal extravagance since moving into the tiny attic flat had been satellite TV. His small portable set now sat on top of a skybox, and the picture, no longer reliant on a feeble indoor aerial, was sharp instead of grainy. Kenneth Clark, the Justice Secretary, was announcing plans to slash 350 million pounds from the legal aid budget. Strike watched through his haze of tiredness as the florid, paunchy man told Parliament that he wished to, quote-unquote, discourage people from resorting to lawyers whenever they face a problem, and instead encouraging them to consider more suitable methods of dispute resolution, end quote. He meant, of course, that poor people ought to relinquish the services of the law. The likes of Strike's average client would still avail themselves of expensive barristers. Most of his work these days was undertaken on behalf of the mistrustful, endlessly betrayed rich. His was the information that fed their sleek lawyers, that enabled them to win better settlements in their vitriolic divorces and their acrimonious business disputes. A steady stream of well-heeled clients was passing his name on to similar men and women, with tediously similar difficulties. This was the reward for distinction in his particular line of work, and if it was often repetitive, it was also lucrative. When the news ended, he clambered laboriously off the bed, removed the remnants of his meal from the chair beside him, and walked stiffly into a small kitchen area to wash everything up. He never neglected such things. Habits of self-respect learned in the army had not left him in the depths of his poverty, nor were they entirely due to military training. He had been a tidy boy, imitating his Uncle Ted, whose liking for order everywhere, from his toolbox to his boathouse, had contrasted so starkly with the chaos that had surrounded Strike's mother, Leda. Within 10 minutes, after a last pee in the toilet that was always sodden because of its proximity to the shower, and cleaning his teeth at the kitchen sink where there was more room, Strike was back on his bed, removing his prosthesis. The weather forecast for the next day was rounding off the news. Sub-zero temperatures and fog. Strike rubbed powder into the end of his amputated leg. It was less sore tonight than it had been a few months ago. Today's full English breakfast and takeaway curry notwithstanding, he had lost a bit of weight since he had been able to cook for himself again, and this had eased the pressure on his leg. He pointed the remote control at the TV screen. a laughing blonde, and her washing powder vanished into blankness. Strike maneuvered himself clumsily beneath the covers. Of course, if Owen Quinn was hiding at his rider's retreat, it would be easy enough to winkle him out. Egotistical bastard, he sounded, flouncing off into the darkness with his precious book. The hazy mental image of a furious man storming away with a hold all over his shoulder dissolved almost as quickly as it had formed. Strike was sliding into a welcome, deep, and dreamless sleep. The faint pulse of a bass guitar far below in the subterranean bar was swiftly drowned by his own rasping snores.